From the CISO Series, it's Cybersecurity Headlines.
DOJ detected SolarWinds hack 6 months earlier than first disclosed. The Godfather of AI quits Google and warns of misinformation dangers, and data breach lawsuits are on the rise. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's Cybersecurity Headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and most definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, cybersecurity and technology executive, Allison Miller. Allison, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Before I move on, we also want to acknowledge our sponsor, Trend Micro. Discover, assess, mitigate. Remember to join us on YouTube Live. To do so, go to CISOseries.com, hit the events dropdown, and look for the Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review image. It's the third one down. Just count it. It'll be there. Have faith. Click on it to join us. We won't wait for you, though, because we've got about 20 minutes. First up here, one of the big ones from this week, late breaking, former Uber security chief Sullivan avoids prison in data breach case. Just broke late yesterday, former chief security officer for Uber, Joe Sullivan, avoided prison while being sentenced for covering up the 2016 theft of company data on 50 million Uber customers while the company was being investigated by the Federal Trade Commission over a previous breach. U.S. District Judge William Orrick sentenced Sullivan to 3 years of probation, noting his significant past work in protecting people from the sort of crime he later concealed. He also said that Sullivan's steps had succeeded in keeping the stolen data from being exposed, and also acknowledged that this was an unprecedented case in terms of sentencing. So, Allison, this case and its ruling open up a number of issues around corporate responsibility, the reputation of senior executives, and as the prosecution suggested, possible double standards when we're talking about culpability, looking at CEOs. I'm curious, what's your take here?
Well, this was a really big case and story that was watched by the CISO community for months. This breach that we're talking about happened in 2016, quite a long time ago. And when it first broke, questions came up too about vulnerability disclosure and bug bounty programs, which were pretty new. But I think we've all been watching it, trying to understand what precedents this is really setting around personal liability, around communication and breach disclosure. And I think a lot of folks are relieved that Joe was able to avoid a prison sentence. 186 letters were sent in to the judge in support of him receiving a non-prison sentence. But I think that while folks maybe are happy that the precedent is not we're sending executives to jail when they make mistakes or do the wrong thing or what have you, but I think we're all noting the judge's words that if they have a similar case tomorrow, that defendant will be going to prison. So I think we're going to continue to watch this.
Do you think this sets a clear enough standard of, when a CISO can take an action that's at the behest of a CEO or something like that versus, like, does this set up a clear boundary of here is culpable behavior that could lead to jail time and here is normal business operations, or does it still feel murky to you?
I think that it is still murky because the case itself was fairly complex and had to work through a lot of issues. But I think folks could agree that more transparency is going to be seen as better, and always have your general counsel next to you when you are making decisions that have legal implications like breach disclosures.
All right, next up here, DOJ detected the SolarWinds hack 6 months earlier than first detected. Kim Zetter, writing in Wired, states that the U.S. Department of Justice, Mandiant, and Microsoft stumbled upon the SolarWinds breach 6 months earlier than previously reported, but were unaware of its significance. Suspicions were triggered when the department detected unusual traffic emanating from one of its servers that was running a trial version of the Orion software suite made by SolarWinds, according to sources familiar with the incident. Investigators reached out to SolarWinds to assist with the inquiry, but the company's engineers were unable to find a vulnerability in their code. In August 2020, the DOJ purchased the Orion system, suggesting the department was satisfied that there was no further threat posed by the Orion suite. So, Allison, with the benefit of hindsight, of course, we have that privilege here. This seems like quite an eyebrow raiser. I'm curious, what's your perspective? Does this, I guess, kind of fit into an appropriate pattern of investigation, or does it seem like someone might have dropped the ball?
Well, I think I can understand it to a certain extent. Sometimes when you have these incidents, what you see first ends up being the tip of the iceberg. And it's disappointing that the folks who were investigating this didn't pull the thread a little harder and get more information out of it their first time tackling it, because a lot of things downstream could have been avoided. And so I think that maybe the lessons learned from a situation like this is not to drop the ball if you can't figure out what root cause was, and understand that if it's difficult to find root cause, then maybe you really do want to dig deeper. On the other hand, I know a lot of folks who are responsible for doing these investigations, and it's rarely so easy to spend many months focused on just the one incident. So, want to give folks kind of benefit of the doubt that there's a lot of things hopping and popping, and sometimes you don't realize that something is such a deep rabbit hole until you really plunge down.
Our next story here getting a lot of run in the tech press this week. The godfather of AI quits Google and warns of misinformation dangers. Jeffrey Hinton, known as the godfather of AI, has quit Google in order to speak more freely about the dangers of AI and, in part, regrets his contribution to the field. Kind of justified it, saying someone else would have done it anyway. Hinton, who helped develop Google's AI over the past decade, expressed concerns about the possibility of AI upending the job market and added he was also concerned about the existential risk of what happens when these things get more intelligent than us. So, Allison, if I were to shout this from the rooftops, you might not give it much thought, but this is the guy that invented and pioneered a lot of this tech going back decades, really, even before his involvement with Google. I guess is this the siren call that we should be listening to, or the Cassandra call that we should be listening to in this point? Do you agree with his concerns? If so, I guess what should we do about it?
Well, I think it's useful to keep in perspective that the what he seems to be most concerned about, at least right now, is the idea that some of these chatbots could be prone to spam and
Mhm.
manipulation. So I think that we are seeing that. So his concerns there feel valid, even if you are not the godfather of AI. Um, that said, so he's not talking about singularity in the AI
Mhm.
taking over right now, but he does actually kind of dot 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 in that direction. So I guess what I would suggest is take note. Maybe agree that we can see some of those impacts of untrained algorithms that are completely unsupervised and how those might run amok. And take these next steps forward, because there's a lot of discussion right now happening about the chatbots and ChatGPT and such. But then when we start thinking about, are the AIs really, in the process of taking over, maybe take with a grain of salt and keep posted for more information from these folks who've been working with them so deeply.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he continues engaging with this topic now that he's no longer with Google. Notably, he did not sign on to any of these. There's been a couple open letters, calling for pauses or stops in AI development and that kind of stuff. We haven't seen him signing on to those. If more of those come out in the future, it'll be interesting to see where he lends his voice in support, and definitely a voice we want to keep in touch with going forward.
Agree. And I hope that he signs all of his communiques to us with a digital signature that can't be forged by some deep fake AI.
Yes, please let's give the deepfake AIs credit. Data breach lawsuits on the rise. This comes from a new report from the law firm Baker Hostetler. They found that more individuals impacted by data breaches are filing lawsuits against the breached organizations. Though many of these lawsuits cover small breaches involving fewer than 1,000 victims, the firm found companies paying more on average for lawsuits and also for investigations into breaches. So, Allison, this certainly puts an evolving spin on the whole ransomware business model, especially from a company's kind of risk and loss assessment here. It's not just the danger of stolen data, but the larger issues of litigation and added to the damage to a company's brand. We've discussed this with some other guests on the show, but I'm curious about your thoughts as to how this influences companies into choosing to pay ransoms outright if they can keep everything quiet, I guess.
Well, the economist in me was also interested to note that while there were less ransomware payouts over the same period, they were on average higher. So it feels like maybe there are some influences on ransomware that are putting a little bit of pressure on things, but that means that when they do get a solid hit, they're going to take it for as much money as they can. And I guess the sort of pushing things back to the CISOs, the decision makers, and the cyber insurers is just to understand that sadly, we have more data points to factor into what the potential costs are going to be associated with a breach. So I guess the way I would TLDR the whole thing is that, use this to make a case for more prevention so that you don't have to deal with the ransomware. You don't have to deal with the network intrusion. Obviously, we'll never get to perfect security, but it does sound like the costs associated with a breakdown in security are getting higher for folks.
Yeah, and as we get more of these, financial or economic data points, I do think that makes making the business case, right, for this kind of spend theoretically at least easier, right? Where, as always, IT security, a lot of times seen as a cost center, but it's when the more studies we have about this out there, the easier it becomes to be like, here's what the data is telling us, like, ounce of prevention, et cetera, et cetera.
Definitely, definitely. It used to be loss of reputation, which can be kind of a squishy thing to hang your hat on, and then breach notification costs. So, if there's a likelihood of a lawsuit coming, in addition to any ransom that might have been paid out, those are just variables you can factor into your model around costs.
All right, well, before we move on, we have to spend a moment and thank our sponsor for today, Trend Micro. Cybersecurity is not just about protection, it's about foresight, agility, and resilience. Navigating a new era of cyber risk demands evolved strategies, new frameworks, and integrated tools to equip security teams to anticipate and defend even against the most advanced attacks. Trend Micro, the global leader in cybersecurity, is bringing the cyber risk conversation to more than 120 cities around the world in their latest Risk to Resilience World Tour, the largest cybersecurity roadshow of its kind. Find the closest city to you and register today to take a leap forward to a more resilient future. Head to trendmicro.com/CISO series. Our next story here, Google rolls out passkeys. The passwordless future is perhaps a little bit closer. Google rolled out support for switching to passkeys on Google accounts, which will prompt users for a passkey when detecting suspicious activity. Passkeys can be revoked in Google account settings, and Google accounts will be supporting existing password-based logins well into the foreseeable future. Allison, we've covered a second story this week on cybersecurity headlines talking about Dashlane, the password manager company, planning to roll out something similar. They're calling it passwordless logins. They're not passkeys, but they are cryptographic keys, kind of the same effect. So I guess my question, are we truly headed toward a passwordless future? And do you think the general public will be able to handle this, or are we going to need some kind of education campaign on this?
Oh, I think when we are ready, the general public will jump on this. I think they will be relieved. I do think we're still at the point where it's passwords are dead, long live passwords. I'm not sure we're quite there yet. Great news that some of this technology is being incorporated into consumer-facing products and platforms at scale. But the key here is that not all platforms are ready. So, so we're going to have to. This is one of those sort of network market kind of situations. The platforms, I think, need to be ready consistently for us to really see that major shift in adoption. But I think that I think that consumers like using their cell phones as their identity. We've seen that in a couple different use cases, and so I think that they are just as eager as we are to close the door on passwords.
Yeah, it's exciting to finally see something like this. I mean, I know the tech specs have been out this for a while. To see this getting rolled out, like in consumers' hands, right? It's one thing to have you know um, the specifications out there for this. We've had that with third party authentication keys and stuff like that for a while, with FIDO compliant stuff. But having Google rolling it out is a pretty big deal. Next up here, Microsoft plans to offer private ChatGPT servers. Earlier this week, Samsung banned employees from using ChatGPT on company devices, citing concerns about leaking data. And those seem to be justified. It came after it accidentally leaked source code to an AI chatbot. Now, Microsoft plans to offer a version of ChatGPT that will run on private servers. This seems tailored for organizations concerned about data leaks or compliance issues, think anything from government usage to healthcare and everything in between. The report says the service could cost as much as 10 times what customers currently pay to use the regular version of ChatGPT. Seems like there might be quite a few companies that would want to at least explore using generative AI tech in a more constrained environment, but they want to protect that valuable data. So, Allison, do you think an in-house chat GPT would be a sitting duck for, threat actors who are essentially using social engineering, spear phishing to get to sensitive data all the time? Or should that even be a consideration, I guess, for thinking about something like this?
I'm not sure that I think the external threat actors are necessarily going to shift from something like a GPT to an internal
Mhm.
service. I think some of the questions about one of these sort of self-hosted services is, for what use cases is the company going to use it? How is it going to be managed and maintained? Just like any other machine learning or analytics data, big data technology that they're going to be using, what will it be used for? And whatever it will be used for, those use cases kind of determine what might then be juicy targeting and valuable for threat actors, whether external or internal. So I would also say that I think a lot of attackers are getting mileage out of something like a chat GPT, whether or not you and your employees are necessarily putting your internal data in there. There's still a lot that folks from the outside are leveraging chatbots and such for, in order to target you and your company.
All right, our next story, drone goggle maker claims firmware sabotage to brick devices. Orca, the maker of first person view drone racing goggles, claims that a contractor introduced code into its device's firmware that acted as a time bomb designed to brick them. On Saturday, customers started reporting that FPV-1 V1 goggles had entered bootloader mode and were unusable. The company says they found the ransomware time bomb, which had been secretly planted a few years ago by a quote, greedy former contractor, their words, with an intention to extract exorbitant ransom from the company, as opposed, I guess, to a reasonable ransom. So, Allison, how prevalent, I guess, are these types of time bombs? It's not every day that we hear that in the cybersecurity press, especially on a multi-year basis. But it certainly seems like a viable tool for ransomware sabotage. Curious, what's your take?
Sure. When I read this story, I thought, wow, it's like adversarial DRM or planned obsolescence on steroids or something. I don't think they're very common. I think we'd hear more about them if we were seeing situations like that. That said, this was really a long game this person was playing. And I think this is why we have product security. And I think we've been talking about AppSec for years and years, and a lot of what the focus on with AppSec is, how could a vulnerability that we introduce be exploited by someone outside? And in product security circles, I'm seeing more and more. It may be about the bugs, it may be about those vulnerabilities, but it may also be, how could this product be exploited, and taking a more holistic look at it. And so I think this is the type of issue that we want to make sure that we factor in to our product security programs. And if we don't, then these types of attacks will be more common, because, of course, that's a great time to ask for a
Yeah.
ransom when the product is already in the customer's hands, and then the company is really out on a limb.
All right, our last story here, Google to remove secure website indicators in Chrome 117. On Tuesday, Google announced that its beloved lock icon, long thought to be a sign of website security and trustworthiness, will soon be replaced with a variant of the tune icon. Basically, it looks like a settings kind of hamburger menu. More than 99% of all web pages are now loaded in Google Chrome over HTTPS. However, Google noted they don't want users to assume these sites are safe, pointing out that nearly all phishing sites use HTTPS these days, and therefore show that lock icon. Their research shows there's definitely a correlation there with consumers. The lock icon will be changed in Chrome 117, due for release in September 2023. Maybe we should call this Schrodinger's browser. A page can be the connection can be secured and the page can be not secured at the same time. Given that we have spent the last few years having to remember to type that S in and advocating for people to install plugins or use specific browsers to make sure they're using HTTPS, I guess how significant is the statement from Google that they don't want users to assume these sites are safe just because they see that lock symbol?
Yeah, I think it's a very subtle point that Google is making. And I know that Chrome team is extremely methodical and thoughtful when they're making user experience changes. So it's a few years ago. Is it a few
Yeah.
years ago? Lord, time passes, that we lost the HTTPS
Yeah.
colon slash slash, and it was replaced with the lock. And we've seen that Google, for as part of HTTPS everywhere and all of that, now you might actually get an alert if you go to an HTTP only site. You might get a safe browsing big red window in your Chrome browser. So I think that they're sort of shifting the experience, because we are closer to a default HTTPS world than we used to be. So they're changing the user experience around that. And now what I think Google's kind of saying is, hey, the lock legitimizes. And 10 years ago, maybe the big concern was that you put your credit card number or your password into an unsecured form that someone was snooping on. But now, the lock legitimizes. So if you are at a site that is encrypting traffic between you, does that mean that that website is safe in any way, or is it legitimate in any way? So they maybe want to remove that thinking, because you could have a phishing site have HTTPS,
Yeah,
right? It
absolutely.
could be a scam site. So I think that it's a very subtle point. So I appreciate the fact that they're going very slowly with these user experience changes, because now we have to train people to think about whole new patterns and cues that they're going to see in front of them, when they make decisions about their behavior on the web.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, Allison, was there any story that you reacted strongly to? A thumbs up, made your eyes roll, just something that made you react?
I guess I think my favorite story is actually about the Godfather of AI, and I'm not sure if it's a thumbs up or an eye roll. It is astonishing when someone who has been working on this and clearly loves the space then turns away and says, none of these companies are taking AI safety seriously enough.
For sure. Again, definitely. Like whatever, if he has a Twitter account or whatever, like I want to be subscribed to whatever updates he has, because I'm curious now that he is free to say what he wants, how he's going to react to the space as hot as it is going forward. But Allison Miller, where can people find you online if they want to follow all of your fine thoughts, Godfather or no of AI?
Sure. So there's my LinkedIn. I'm Allison Miller on LinkedIn. I also have a very rarely updated blog at allymiller.info. And you can find me on Twitter sometimes at Selena Kyle, same username on Mastodon and some other social services.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Allison Miller, for being on the show, dropping all of the knowledge and having the good takes. Truly, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks also to our sponsor, Trend Micro. Discover, assess, mitigate. A reminder to please join us on Friday, May 12th for Super Cyber Friday, where our topic will be hacking security culture, an hour of critical discussion on motivating the entire organization to always be thinking conscientiously about security. And we'll be back next week with another episode of the Week in Review Show, of course, getting that expert commentary in the week's news. In the meantime, you can still get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines. Every single day, give us about 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. Until the next time we meet, I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.